A group of captured Union soldiers escape in a war balloon, only to crash halfway around the world on an island of giant animals in the 1961 adaptation of Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea crossover novel known as Mysterious Island. That's the movie we'll be unearthing today on Movie Bones. Hey Ryan, I'm thinking about writing a script for a movie, but I don't want to spend time actually working on building main characters you care about or developing a coherent plot. And while I'd normally be worried about it dragging like molasses in January, I figure all I got to do is every few minutes or so just put in parentheses, insert orchestral bombast here, and that'll communicate the amazingness of it. What do you think?
I think, my good friend Justin, you will have a movie on par with Mysterious Island.
Oh, so that saves me a whole bunch of time. I'll just watch that instead. Except I won't again.
Sounds like a perfect Saturday afternoon.
Oh, good golly. It sounds like, man. So, okay, today's film is, as mentioned, Mysterious Island. It's a 1961 big screen translation of the pseudo-crossover / sequel, I guess, of the Jules Verne novel. It's not a crossover and it's not a sequel. I can't quite categorize it, but it's related to, put it that way, Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It stars Michael Craig as Captain Cyrus Harding, Michael Callan as Herbert Brown, Gary Merrill as Gideon Spilett, Beth Rogan as Elena Fairchild, Percy Herbert as Sergeant Pencroft, Herbert Lom as Captain Nemo, Dan Jackson as Corporal Neb Nugent, Joan Greenwood as Lady Mary Fairchild, and is directed by Cy Enfield. It follows a group of Civil War soldiers who escape capture on a war balloon, only to end up landing half a world away in the South Pacific on the island in question, where they run into all kinds of abnormally large animals. And that's the basic setup. Where do you start with a film like this? Because when I was done watching it, I was just ready to toss it in a balloon so it too could get lost. You know what I mean?
Yes,
never to be seen again.
Yeah. It's such a neat premise. Like, well, no, not premise. It's such a neat setting because the setting it matters, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know, it doesn't matter at the same time.
Well,
you understand what I'm saying?
I think I see what you're saying. I mean, and I had the same feeling about all kinds of things in the film, in part, I think, because the film doesn't really spend a lot of time developing its conflicts. In fact, I'm still kind of unsure if it even had much of a conflict at all. Do you see what I mean?
The conflict was surviving.
Yeah, that was one thing. Except and I felt like that you could have done that, but I just didn't get that because there's a lot of things that happen to them, but each one of them seems to get resolved pretty quickly, and It seems like there's never a challenge that it's like ongoing. I think of like a man versus nature story like Castaway, for example. Mm-hmm. And you have all these different challenges, and you have different challenges there too, but every one of them, you feel like, Tom Hanks' character, I forget, as Chuck Nolan, I think is the character's name in that movie. And every one of them, you feel the struggle he goes through. When he finally creates fire, you're about ready to dance there with him,
Yes.
And here, it's like, well, that was, it's like the Staples button again. You hit the Staples button and that was easy. And they go through that a number of times.
That's the perfect analogy, because throughout the whole entire movie, like when they needed something, it fell in their laps. You understand what I'm saying? Like, especially like closer to the end of the movie, when, like, for instance, I'm going to give spoilers. I don't care about this movie enough to
go ahead, dude.
This is not no spoilers.
Go ahead.
But like, even though they didn't work right away, they found like perfectly intact guns, and it's like, oh, that's super convenient. I mean, they just kept finding things that helped them, and also the animals that they came across who very much wanted to kill them didn't do enough to try to kill them. Because, like, when I'm not good with the characters' names in this movie, I'm not going to try to be good with characters' names.
Don't worry.
But, like, the first giant creature they found was a crab, and it picked up one of the guys in its claws, and I'm sitting there thinking, Man, if this was a movie that was made in 2024, that person is just cut in half right away.
And by the way, speaking of that scene with the crab and the guy who gets caught, did you expect, and I fully expected, and if you want to say about bucking expectations, there's, of course, the black guy gets killed first trope. And I thought because it was the black guy who gets picked up by the crab,
I kept feeling bad because like the whole entire movie, I kept thinking, when are they going to kill this guy? Because like it's such a racist stereotype that's happened throughout so many movies that you just like kept feeling like every time something bad happened, you're almost like, run away, dude.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's like, and that's the reason that the trope gets buried in your brain. You start to think that, especially when you watch older films. More modern films have tended to, to been more conscious about avoiding that. But when you're watching an older film, it's like, okay, it's when it's going to happen, and they actually don't do it here. Of course,
Yeah.
they don't replace it by anything better. I mean, because they still later on they still have the sexism, which I think that the original novel didn't have women in it, but of course they had to have women. They brought women on board here just so they could have a sexist stereotype, apparently.
Oh yeah, I mean, she's like, you have, is Elena?
Oh, it's
She's
Elena
the younger
Fairchild.
one?
She's the younger one. Yeah, Elena Fairchild.
Yeah, so you have her. I mean, she's very much, the Lady Mary Fairchild makes all of them clothes. Doesn't make clothes for herself, which I thought was like a bit weird. But then makes Elena clothes, and her clothes are very much, they're just like it's the men's version of the clothes.
Shall we say a little ahead of their time by the exact amount
Very
that the
much.
movie,
I mean,
by the exact amount that to reach the decade that the movie was filmed in.
Yeah, there's a scene in the movie, and it's done for the appeal. It's very clearly done for the appeal.
I do have a problem when the cameraman tries to make the audience feel, at least the men in the audience, feel like a peeping Tom, for example. It's like, I didn't sign up for that. That's your decision, dude. The costume design and the way they shot it, yeah. And she even has a whole discussion with her. I guess it's her mother. Lady Mary Fairchild. Yeah, that's her mother, is Lady Mary Fairchild, the one who makes the costumes and everything. And it's almost like it's drawing attention to itself that, hey, this is for you 60s folks out there, right? Mm-hmm. And so it even draws attention to itself that way by even adding it into the dialogue. The movie never does anything with its set pieces. We discussed the thing where there's the man versus nature thing, but you could have had man versus man in this too. You could have had man versus the world even. One of the soldiers that they pick up with them in the escape attempt is accidentally they get a stowaway. It's a Confederate soldier because the majority of them are Union soldiers trying to escape. But they pick up this one Confederate and he knows how to fly the balloon. And there's a black soldier character, and maybe putting him on the island together where they have to work together, and maybe there's going to be some development there. But no, it's like after a while, the whole cast just kind of becomes kind of like a family, Yeah. They just tack on new members of the family. And so that's gone too. And later on, I'll get into the third kind of conflict they could have done. But they're all getting along so well. It made me think of the Disney film from the 60s. Was it Swiss Family Robinson?
Yes.
Have you seen that?
No.
No.
But I know what you're talking about.
It does hit several of the same kind of certain notes of that film where you have this, it's a family on an island, and they initially are struggling. They don't see any hope of escape. Here they have a hope of escape, but they just kind of get so used to it, it becomes like home to them. And they're all just kind of sort of settling into life on the island. And just like in both films, there's a pirate attack. Both films have similar kinds of sexism too, where it's like the women are just there so that the youngest guy has someone he can end up going out with later.
The conflict is a big giant animal attacking them.
Yeah, it's just
that's it.
and the animal is taken out, usually with not much trouble at all. This is where you get to the 2/3 of the way through the film, after the movie realizes we have to do something here. It's like the movie tries to provide you an answer as to how some of these things are happening, although it's not satisfactory. They tell you basically this is the island that Captain Nemo retires to, so to speak. He's done with his days. The Nautilus, for reasons that are left unspecified, can no longer set sail. He doesn't specify why. I had to go back and check that. But here's Captain Nemo, who is known as a character who rails against the world. It's his fight against the world's determination to wage war, and he's determined to end war on his terms. Basically roaming the seas as a free agent, just sinking ships at whim, anywhere, any ships, really, doesn't matter what nation. And that's the point. He's trying to defeat war as a concept by taking out the means of war. Well, he's gone from that to saying instead of fighting the means of war, he's going to fight the underlying causes of war, to give people the food and the means they need to survive. And I think that's a much more noble thing. It's like, well, why couldn't we have had that movie? Because that right there, like, first of all, he's Herbert Lom's the best actor amongst all of them, in my opinion. He has this great kind of presence on the screen that the others just don't have. And you could make him your central character and have the story revolve around his coming to terms with himself about how he's approached the subject of defeating war as a concept. That's much more interesting to me.
But you also then have to ask this question, what's the author's intent? Like, what was the creator's intent in putting this upon him? Because is he saying, oh, this is something that could never happen? Or is he saying that this is something he does not personally want to happen? Because what happens to Captain Nemo in the end?
Well, in every iteration, he dies.
It's like he goes to get all of his schematics and stuff, and it just, like, the world crashes down around him. So is it like, are we saying that this can never actually happen, or are we saying that the author just does not want this to happen?
Yeah, and I don't know. It's like when a death like that is so random. I mean, you could say if randomness of death is your point in your thesis, then sure, but that's thinking way too more deeply about a subject like this than I think the author intended.
Well,
these are adventure stories.
If the randomness of death was what he was going for, then more characters should have died.
I think well, I wish some of the others would have died, just to make it more interesting, and you actually might have felt something. But I think he just did that as a kind of that ironic twist ending, where it's like world peace was at your hands and disposal, if only. But anyway, yeah, I thought there was at least potential there if you want to explore it. I think someone could do an adaptation of this and reinvent it and take the source material and turn it into something more interesting.
That's the issue that I have with this whole thing, because, like I said, I've never read the book. If you read the books out there, tell us, see did you like them? But this movie has been done over and over and over again. And with something like this, and with it being so close to the book, I'm like, I don't know. I'm sitting there just like, why is this done so many times? It is really neat we have all these adventure books by this one guy. Like, that is awesome. So that's why I don't heap on it too much. But again, I don't know. I was watching this movie. It made me think, especially after learning how many iterations of this movie there is. And I'm like, I don't get it.
There's any number of B movies or fantasy movies at the time you could have picked out off a shelf that involve overly sized animals on an island, or, that kind of adventure where you have, ordinary people just fighting against giant monsters and giant animals all over the place. Look at some of the B movies from the 50s. You have them, it's like the one with the ants and everything. And you put it on an island, and I think in this case, perhaps maybe it was just that it's a Jules Verne, that you could just attach Jules Verne's name to this one that distinguishes it from all the others. And it's a paltry excuse for making a film, if that's what your goal is. But it does come off as very much kind of wallpaper paste, It's got none of its own flavor.
There's only 3 giant creatures. They show up randomly for the most part. And then after that, it's all said and done. They're just never trying to figure out, why are these creatures so big?
Nobody bothers to even ask the question. You think this is a duh, right? It's like if you came across a place where there's something that different, it's like, man, what caused this? This is crazy.
Oh, sorry. That kind of brings up another gripe I have about the movie. I don't know if this happened in the book. If you remember it in the synopsis, please feel free to tell us. But also, at the beginning of the movie, they escape on the hot air balloon. That's fine and dandy. But in the midst of their travels in the hot air balloon, you have this voiceover that talks about this storm that just absolutely devastates the whole entire Earth.
The
And then after
worst
that, there's
storm
nothing
in the
more.
history of mankind.
Yeah, they looked down at one point and they saw just destruction from this storm. And that's it. That's it. Like, after that's all said and done, no more conversation about that. And I'm thinking, like, you know, the time setting is in the midst of the Civil War. I'm like, there's some stuff to go on. Does that mean that, like, you know, the storm was so bad that it just completely destroyed the Civil War? That would be kind of a cool thing to explore. Also, if, like, you know, you're kind of hinting at some kind of a post-apocalyptic society, that's something I'd like to explore. But no, it's just, there's this mysterious island. This thing happened to us before we got to here. And from there on, we just got to get off the island.
It does feel very much like a contrived setup to get onto the island. It's like there's all kinds of ways you can write yourself onto the location. The setup is less important than the movie proper in the middle, which they blow anyway. But if you're going to make it a ship goes off course, you know, change the circumstances, okay? Figure out another way, because having the worst storm in the century feels like, well, that's a topic all its own. And it's like, if this is the worst storm, not just in the century, but we're talking about like the entire hit, they make it point that this is the worst storm ever. And it's like, if that's the case, it should be like Noah's flood or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it just didn't feel like it was that consequential to what they were describing. And on the point about the narration, this movie illustrates so well why narration is so rarely used in film and how even more rare it is to have it done well. I can think of one off the top of my head. And if you've seen Shawshank Redemption, that's pretty much the best one I've ever heard. Maybe there's others. And I'm sure if I thought a little harder, there'd be others on the list too. But that one always comes to mind. The reason why you can only usually think of a handful of those is because of how much of it you're just telling and not showing. In this case, you think the only thing it does is makes you think that the narrator, who is the captain character of the crew, it makes you think that he's going to be the main character, which, as we've already established, is not the case. There is no main character except possibly Nemo, who's more like the only interesting character, except he's not the main character. You know, for my final verdict, man, I got to come down. This is my very first in the show. Don't look at it. The film had me dragging pretty much through its entire length. There was a few bright spots with Nemo and you know, Harryhausen's work's always nice, but you can find better of those examples of both Lom's acting and Harryhausen's work and special effects in other movies and get more entertainment out of it. There's just no good reason I can say you ought to watch this. It'll melt your face with boredom.
I agree. And the only reason why, or one of the biggest reasons, not the only reason, but one of the biggest reasons why I agree, because if you are gung-ho on, you know, watching this story as a film, you can find just different versions of this story as a movie. There is a Soviet-Russian one that came out in 1941. There's a television series. I don't know how long it lasted. There's the one with The Rock, which, you know, it's The Rock. You're going to be entertained no matter what. There is actually a version with Kyle MacLachlan. He's the main character, or at least he looks like the main character. I also want to say that's got Patrick Stewart in it, and he plays Captain Nemo.
Well, that'd be a good choice.
Yeah, so like I said, you know, you're definitely going to get acting out of Patrick Stewart.
Well, folks, I mean, that about wraps it up for our take on Mysterious Island. If you're enjoying Ryan and me take on these older films and sharing our experiences, feel free to follow us on your podcasting platform of choice. We announce our films in advance so you can join us on the ride each week, so you can see how our thoughts compare with yours. That being said, what is next week's film, Ryan?
Next week's film is... Dun, 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 dun. All right, I've got to say this real quick. It is about next week's film. I'm not going to give any kind of like feeling about next week's film. If you are an American, you will find this film to be called The Detective. If you are not an American, this film is called Father Brown. I think it should have been appropriately named Father Brown, and we'll talk about that next week. But it's The Detective, or known as Father Brown, starring Obi-Wan Kenobi himself, Alec Guinness.
There you go. So that's it for this week, folks. Until next week, you got anything else to say, Ryan?
Kyle MacLachlan was in the new Fallout series. Pretty good series. Go watch that.
Instead of this. There you go.
Yeah.
All right, folks. You guys take care. And Ryan, I'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye-bye, folks.